Okay, so today I'm going to give you a very basic introduction to VOR navigation. VOR stands for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range. It's a mode of navigation that pilots use in order to navigate the aircraft from one point to the other. As you can see on this screen, a VOR map is comprised of all these circles that represent VOR stations on the ground. Each station is identified with a specific number that corresponds to the frequency that's transmitted by that station. Now we can use these frequencies in order to identify different VOR stations. So for example, down here, the Hudson VOR station is identified by a frequency of 113.6 megahertz. We also see that these stations are connected to one another by lines known as vectors, and each vector corresponds to a particular heading. For example, this vector corresponds to a heading of 102 degrees. So, this being said, if we want to go from one VOR station to the next, so let's say from A to B, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to identify the VOR frequency at our destination. So in this case, it's going to be 113.6 megahertz at Hudson VOR station. Next, we need to choose a heading that will take us from point A to B. So in this case, we are going to choose a heading that corresponds to 140 degrees. So all we need to do is to tune the frequency of our VOR station into our nav1 radio, identify that station, and then fly a particular heading that corresponds to the vector that will take us from point A to B. So now that we know the basics of VOR, let's take a look at a specific example. In this example, we want to fly from Los Angeles International Airport, KLAX, to the SLI VOR identified with a frequency of 115.7 megahertz. Now, as you can see, you can approach this station from different headings. You can approach it from north. You can approach it from southwest. You can approach it from east or any other directions. As you can see, there are 360 different headings that we can use in order to approach this VOR station. But the question is, which one should we use in order to get from KLAX to the SLI VOR? So, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing that we need to do is to enter the frequency that corresponds to the VOR station of our interest into our nav1 radio. In this case, we want to go to the SLI VOR station with a frequency of 115.7 megahertz. So we're just going to enter that into our nav1 radio and then make sure it's in the active section of the radio. Then we're just going to activate the nav1 radio, and eventually you will hear a beeping sound that's an indication of the fact that the aircraft has picked up on the Morse code that's being sent out by the VOR station of our interest, basically telling us that we have successfully identified that station. So if you were paying attention to this screen, you should have noticed that the needle in your VOR instrument, that is the instrument at the upper right hand corner of your instrument panel, just deviated to the right. Any deviations from the center line should tell you that you are not on the right path and you won't get to the VOR station of your interest. Therefore, your job as a pilot is to maintain that needle in a centered position during the VOR approach. But for now, let's take a look at how we can find the proper vector that will successfully take us from LAX to the VOR station of our interest, SLI. Look at the lower portion of your VOR instrument. There is an arrow that's pointing downward. What you need to do is to rotate the OBS knob until that arrow points upward and the needle comes to the centered position. Once this happens, you should look at the upper portion of your VOR instrument and read the heading. Then put that heading in your heading indicator and make sure you fly in that heading. If you manage to do this, the needle should stay centered and you should fly in the right direction to the VOR of your interest. Remember, any deviations from the center line are telling you that you have deviated from the proper path to the VOR station of your interest. So, apply the proper corrections throughout your flights in order to maintain that needle in the centered position. Now, as you can see, after we do all of this, the heading that's shown in the upper portion of the VOR instrument turns out to be about 115 degrees. So we're just going to put 115 degrees in our heading indicator and fly in that heading. And that should take us to the VOR station of our interest.